The house was quiet except for the steady hum of the vacuum as Clara moved across the floor, its deep, rhythmic sound filling the room. Outside, the sunlight poured through the large bay windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The house felt like a shrine to perfection, pristine and untouched. It had the look of wealth, the kind of wealth that paid people like Clara to make sure things stayed this way. Every corner of this house reflected the success of the family who lived in it. Every surface was clean, every chair perfectly aligned. It was as if they'd carefully constructed a world that needed no more than the occasional dusting, a quick mop, and someone to fix the creases in their linens. Clara didn't mind the work. She'd been cleaning for as long as she could remember. It was a job she knew well, a job that didn't ask for much, but it also didn't give much back. She was just one of the many invisible hands that kept everything running. A housemaid. That's what she was. And that's what they saw her as, the woman who cleaned, the one who stayed out of sight, the one who was never truly part of their world, just a small cog in a machine that kept their perfect lives running. She moved through the house, pushing the vacuum over the plush carpet in the family room, barely registering the movements of her body as she worked. She was used to it. This was her routine. But today there was something different. It wasn't just the steady rhythm of her movements, or the way the house seemed to breathe in time with her. No, today was different because Clara had something the family didn't know about. A small secret, hidden in the most unlikely place. Her phone. The phone had become her quiet refuge, her little escape. It was where she tracked her savings, watched her investments grow little by little. She'd started small, taking the tips her friend Patricia had given her. And now, after months of careful planning, the app on her phone told a story the family had never seen. Every time Clara opened it, she saw numbers growing slowly but steadily. It was a secret she kept hidden in the palm of her hand. To them, she was still the housemaid. To herself, she was beginning to see something more. The family was gathered in the dining room, their voices rising and falling in the usual disjointed chatter. Clara had learned to tune it out. It was always the same. The father, Mr. Jenkins, the wealthy businessman, would talk about his latest investment, his latest deal. The mother, Mrs. Jenkins, would discuss the plans for their next vacation. Always the latest and most luxurious destination. The children would chime in with their plans for college, their new gadgets, the latest trends. It was all so predictable, so neatly packaged. The life of privilege they led was as effortless as it was loud, their expectations clear and well-defined. Clara had heard it all before. In fact, she could practically repeat their conversations verbatim. They never spoke of anything deeper than their own lives, their own little bubble. They had everything they needed, and Clara, well, she had nothing but her work. It was a life she had resigned herself to, a life where she was invisible. She took a deep breath as she finished the vacuuming. As the low buzz of the machine faded, she listened closely to the conversations coming from the other room. Mr. Jenkins was laughing at something one of the children had said. The laughter sounded hollow, almost rehearsed, and Clara felt a familiar twinge of discomfort in her chest. She couldn't quite explain why. It was as if the sound didn't match the space it filled, like a song played on the wrong instrument. She shook it off. She wasn't here to analyze their lives. She was here to clean. As she stepped into the kitchen, she caught sight of the family's newest addition, an elegant glass vase sitting on the marble counter, filled with fresh lilies. It was perfect, too perfect. The vase had been placed with such precision, such care, it almost felt like a symbol of something. But Clara couldn't quite place what. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mrs. Jenkins appeared, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked into the kitchen. She gave Clara a sharp nod, her lips tight, the same strained smile she always wore. "Clara," she said, her voice light but clipped, "could you make sure the guest room is ready for our visitors tomorrow? I'll need you to air out the linens. Oh, and don't forget to polish the silverware." Clara nodded, the routine greeting falling into place like it always did. "Yes, ma'am. I'll get right on it." Mrs. Jenkins turned to leave, but not before glancing at the vase on the counter. That vase was quite the investment. she said, her tone more proud than necessary. "I think it's going to be a statement piece when we host the dinner party next month." Clara bit back a smile. She had seen the vase in the store. She knew how much it cost. But the thought of the family bragging about it, about how it was a statement piece, felt hollow. They never saw the real work behind the scenes. Never saw the people who made their world possible. Clara's thoughts were interrupted as she felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She quickly checked it, just a quick glance to make sure no one saw. The screen lit up with a message from Patricia. "Patricia, Clara, you've got to check your stocks today. You're up 30%. This is the time to invest more." Clara's heart skipped a beat. 30%. She stared at the message, her fingers hesitating over the screen. She wasn't ready. She'd never been ready for something like this. The idea of taking more money and putting it into something unknown scared her. She was just a housemaid, just a woman who cleaned the homes of wealthy people. But what if this was her chance? What if, for once, she could build something that was just hers? Her hands shook as she tapped on the app, the screen loading slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. The numbers on the screen were growing, slowly but steadily. Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. Her balance had grown. The small savings she'd been setting aside, the investments she'd made quietly without telling anyone, had turned into something real. Her finger hovered over the transfer button, but then her gaze shifted to the family gathered in the other room. Their voices, their laughter, it all seemed so shallow, so distant. Clara had never felt more removed from their world than she did in that moment. And yet she was still here, in their world, cleaning their floors, making their meals, polishing their silverware. But this wasn't where Clara's story would end. She had already started to write a new one. The app on her phone had become more than just a secret. It was her quiet rebellion. It was her hope. As the family continued their conversation, Clara took one last look at the phone, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't stay in the background forever. The morning air was thick with humidity as Clara stepped outside, the weight of the house's perfect stillness lingering on her shoulders. The sun, already high in the sky, beat down on the small, quiet neighborhood of Winston. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car driving by, the hum of life far removed from the world she knew. Clara had always found solace in this neighborhood's quiet simplicity. It was familiar and it had its own rhythm, its own pulse. But today, everything felt different. She was different. The family was out for the day, another one of their lavish trips to a spa or shopping spree. Clara was left alone with the house, the silence almost suffocating. It was the perfect time to continue her quiet venture into the world of investing. She took a deep breath, adjusting the old, worn apron she always wore, and slipped back into the world that had been her constant companion for years. She walked to the kitchen, where a small table by the window overlooked the street. Her phone, still on the table, lay waiting. Clara's fingers hovered over the screen. She had promised herself just one more small investment, something that wouldn't be too risky, but enough to start building some real savings. Her friend Patricia had been insistent. "Clara, it's the right time. You've saved enough. Now it's time to build on it." Patricia had told her over coffee 2 weeks ago. Clara had agreed but always found an excuse to wait. It wasn't that she didn't believe in the plan. She just wasn't sure she was meant for something bigger than the life she already had. She had never been someone who took risks, not like the people she worked for. They had always seemed so certain of their place in the world. They never questioned their decisions. They never wondered whether they were enough. Clara had spent years wondering just that. As she unlocked the screen, Clara's thoughts wandered back to the conversation from yesterday. It was Mrs. Jenkins, her employer, sitting at the kitchen table with her friends. They didn't see Clara walk in. The conversation had turned to Clara in a passing comment, as if she weren't there at all. "Clara's been with us for years, hasn't she? I mean, she's a good worker," Mrs. Jenkins had said, "but it's not like she'll ever amount to anything more, you know?" One of the women had laughed, a short, dismissive sound. I can't imagine her ever doing anything other than cleaning. It's just what she's suited for." The comment had stung more than Clara had expected. She had smiled politely and gotten back to her work, but the words stayed with her. It was true, wasn't it? She had always been told that her place was in the background. She was just a housemaid, a woman with little ambition and fewer dreams. It was a role she had come to accept, one that everyone around her seemed to reinforce. Clara opened the app, her heart racing. The familiar screen blinked back at her, but now it didn't seem as comforting. She had been so careful with her choices. The investments had been slow and steady, small buys that fit well within her budget. But now that she was looking at the numbers in front of her, Clara was struck by how much had grown. The percentage increase was startling. It was more than she had ever expected. She knew she couldn't keep ignoring this. This was her chance. But there was also that voice in the back of her head. The voice that had always told her she wasn't cut out for more. The voice that reminded her she was just a maid, and maids didn't build fortunes. They cleaned them. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling deeply. She could hear the faint sounds of a car passing by outside. The world seemed to move on without her. But for the first time, Clara didn't feel invisible. She felt the weight of her own decision. As she made her way to the backyard to gather some fresh vegetables for dinner, her phone buzzed again. It was Patricia. "Patricia, Clara, you have to check it now. The market is shifting. Don't wait too long. This is your moment." Clara's hands shook slightly as she read the message. She had been telling herself that tomorrow would be the day, that she would take the leap then. But tomorrow had become a never-ending string of tomorrows. Patricia's message felt like a gentle push. This is your moment. She had heard that phrase before, but this time, it felt different. For so long, Clara had been waiting for someone to tell her it was okay to dream beyond the walls of the house she cleaned. She had hoped that someone, anyone, would come along and tell her she deserved more. But now no one was coming. It was time for her to believe it herself. With trembling hands, Clara opened the app again. The numbers were still there, still growing. She couldn't deny it anymore. This was real. Her hard work had paid off and it was time to act. Her mind raced as she considered the possibilities. If she kept going, if she kept investing, maybe one day she could do more than just clean other people's homes. Maybe she could build something of her own. But the doubt lingered. She was still a housemaid. No matter how much money was in her account, she couldn't escape the identity she had been assigned. And that's when it hit her. The people who had dismissed her for years, who had believed she was destined for nothing more than this life, were also the ones who had never seen her true potential. The same family that paid her to clean their homes, homes filled with luxury she could never afford, had no idea what was brewing quietly inside her. They thought they knew who she was, but they didn't. Clara had a secret, one she kept hidden from everyone, even herself for a long time. But no more. Clara stood up, her decision made. She would take that next step. She would stop hiding her ambition and take control. She would keep working, yes, but this time it would be for something more. She wasn't just a housemaid anymore. She was Clara Davis, and she had the power to change her life. The kitchen, once a place of quiet humility, now felt different. It was no longer just a room where Clara cleaned the remnants of others' lives. It was the room where she had made her first decision toward a future she would build herself. She wasn't invisible anymore. Clara picked up her phone again, typed a quick reply to Patricia, and hit send. "Clara, I'm in. Let's do this." The weight that had been pressing down on her chest lifted. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but she knew she couldn't keep living in the shadows. The time had come to step into the light. The next few weeks felt like a blur to Clara. The mornings continued the same, filled with the rhythm of her work. The same meticulous routines. Dusting, sweeping, making breakfast for the family, cleaning up after their dinner parties. But underneath the surface, something had shifted inside her. She still moved through the house like a shadow, but now her footsteps carried a quiet power, a knowledge that, despite what the world thought of her, she was building something for herself. There were moments when the doubt crept in, when she wondered if she was truly capable of this transformation, if this life of small wins could ever really add up to anything. Clara had always been practical, grounded in the reality of her work. She had spent years of her life keeping things in order for other people, keeping their homes in perfect shape, keeping their families in line. But now, for the first time, she was focusing on herself. Her phone buzzed again one morning as she wiped down the kitchen counters, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. Patricia's name appeared on the screen. Patricia. Clara, check your app. Your first dividend payment came through. It's not huge, but it's a start. We've been talking about this moment for months. Let's keep going. Clara felt a knot in her stomach. It was only a small sum, hardly enough to make a dent in her finances. But it was real. It was the first step. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, the life she had been dreaming of wasn't so out of reach after all. She glanced at the phone again, the numbers glowing brightly on the screen. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was money she had earned, not through sweat and toil for someone else, but through small, calculated moves she had made in silence. It was the first time in her life that Clara had seen her money work for her, rather than her working endlessly for it. Clara tucked the phone into her apron pocket, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in ages, she felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was something, and that something felt like the beginning of a new chapter in her life. As the day passed, Clara went about her tasks with a new sense of determination. The work was still the same. The family was still oblivious to her transformation, to the quiet power she was quietly amassing. But Clara had started to think differently. She didn't feel as invisible as she once did. She began to see herself as more than just a housemaid. She was building a future, her future. It wasn't always easy. The doubts didn't go away completely. Every time she looked at her bank app and saw that small payment, the nagging voice in the back of her mind reminded her of what she had always believed. You're just a maid, Clara. You don't belong in the world of money and investments. You're meant to stay in the background. But with each small victory, that voice grew quieter. One evening, Clara sat down at the kitchen table after the family had left for yet another night out. The house was still and silent, the only sound the occasional rustling of the leaves outside as a breeze drifted through the window. Clara poured herself a glass of water and picked up her phone once again. She had a message from Patricia. Patricia, Clara, you're up another 15%. Your portfolio is starting to look good. Don't let this moment pass you by. Invest again while the market is still moving. Clara stared at the message for a long time. The words up another 15% echoed in her head. The numbers were starting to feel real now, but there was still a fear that held her back. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the next step, but she had come so far. She had started this journey with nothing but a few quiet decisions and a belief that maybe there was more to life than scrubbing floors. Her finger hovered over the screen as she considered Patricia's advice. She had worked for years, long days in the homes of others, never asking for more, never thinking she could have more. But now, she was starting to see that the power to change her life had always been within her reach. Clara's mind raced. She wasn't just a housemaid anymore. She had become a student of money, of investments, of building something beyond her current reality. And that was a transformation that no one could take from her. Not even the families she cleaned for. Not even the dismissive glances from the people who looked at her and saw only a housemaid. Clara pressed the button on her phone, confirming another small investment. It was another step forward, a small victory in a life that had been filled with too many moments of defeat. It wasn't a dramatic leap. It wasn't going to make her rich overnight, but it was progress. And for Clara, that was enough. The weeks passed by in much the same rhythm. Clara's days were filled with cleaning, organizing, and making sure the house stayed in pristine condition. The family, oblivious to the quiet transformation taking place, continued their lives with all the ease money could buy. They had their dinners, their vacations, their luxurious lifestyle. Clara had her investments, her small wins, and that was enough to make her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. One evening, Clara stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world beyond the house seemed far away, but Clara felt connected to it in a way she never had before. For the first time, she saw herself as part of something bigger, something that stretched beyond the walls of the houses she cleaned and into the vast, unknown world of financial independence. Her phone buzzed again, snapping Clara out of her thoughts. It was another message from Patricia. Patricia, Clara, you're doing great. Just keep going. You're making a difference, not just for yourself, but for your children too. You're showing them what's possible. Clara's heart swelled. She thought of her children, of the sacrifices she had made for them, of the dreams she had for their future. She had always wanted them to have more. Make that happen. She could give them the future she had always dreamed of. The next morning, as Clara cleaned the floors of the living room, she realized something. She was no longer just going through the motions. She was building a life that was entirely hers. No one could take that away from her. Not the family she worked for, not the society that had labeled her as just a housemaid. Clara had taken control, and she was doing it on her terms. The small wins had added up. Every dividend payment, every little bit of progress, was leading her to a place she had never imagined. It wasn't about the money. It was about the quiet strength she had found within herself. It was about the journey she had started, and the future she was now building. As she finished cleaning the last room in the house, Clara smiled. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the housemaid. She was Clara Davis, a woman who had taken small steps to create a life that was entirely her own. Clara stood by the open kitchen window, the warm breeze rustling the leaves of the large oak tree outside. The morning was quiet, the sounds of her cleaning routine filling the silence. She glanced at the clock. Almost time for the family to return. The steady hum of the house was a comfort to her now, a constant in a world that felt like it was shifting beneath her feet. She had come so far since she first started making her investments. The small wins were starting to add up, and each day she felt more and more like she was building something of her own, something no one could take from her. But just as quickly as that feeling of pride blossomed inside her, it was cut short by the sudden ringing of the doorbell. Clara's hand froze mid-swipe across the counter as she heard the unmistakable sound of laughter from outside. It was the family, back from their latest outing. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron, tucked the phone back into her pocket, and walked toward the front door. When she opened it, Mrs. Jenkins was standing there, her face glowing with the light of yet another successful shopping trip. Mr. Jenkins stood behind her, his arms crossed, his usual air of superiority unmistakable. The children, always too busy with their gadgets, barely noticed Clara's presence as they passed by. "Clara," Mrs. Jenkins called, waving a hand dismissively. "We're having some guests over later, so I'll need you to make sure the guest room is prepared. The linens haven't been aired out in a while. Could you take care of that?" Clara nodded quietly. "Of course, ma'am. I'll get right on it." Mrs. Jenkins barely acknowledged her as she breezed past. Clara felt a familiar pang in her chest, one she had felt many times over the years, the recognition that, to them, she was just an invisible fixture, someone who existed to serve their needs. A part of her wanted to scream, to make them see her as more than just the woman who cleaned their messes. But she had learned, over the years, that people like the Jenkins family didn't care to see anything more than what was convenient for them. As Clara turned to go back inside, she heard Mr. Jenkins's voice, deep and hearty, cutting through the air. "Did you see that new house down the street? The one the McAllisters just bought? I can't believe how much money they're throwing around. It's practically obscene." Mrs. Jenkins's voice responded with a laugh. "They do love their status symbols. But we could always do a bit more to impress our guests. I'm sure Clara would agree. Don't you think?" Clara froze. The words hit her like a cold slap, though she knew they weren't directed at her. But they might as well have been. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest as she made her way to the guest room. She could feel her hands trembling slightly as she straightened the bed linens, her mind replaying Mrs. Jenkins's words. "I'm sure Clara would agree." She'd heard those words so many times in the past, uttered casually, dismissively, without any real thought behind them. She was just a maid to them, a servant who didn't deserve to be seen as anything else. It was how they saw her. It was how they always saw her. The housemaid, the woman who could never rise beyond her station. But Clara wasn't just a housemaid anymore. She wasn't just a woman who cleaned the house for the Jenkins family. She had started to build something of her own. Something that didn't depend on their approval or their dismissive comments. The numbers in her app, those small victories, proved it. Yet, even now, when Clara was standing in her own quiet power, the echoes of their mockery still hurt. That afternoon, the family gathered in the living room, the usual hum of conversation filling the air. Clara moved quietly in and out of the room, preparing snacks and drinks for their guests. She could hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of their voices rising in the background. It was the same scene over and over. They didn't see her. They didn't need to. She was just the person who made their lives easier, who took care of their messes while they lived in their bubble of luxury. And yet, something inside Clara shifted. The mockery stung, but it also fueled something deeper inside her. She wasn't going to be invisible anymore. She wasn't going to let their dismissive attitudes keep her from claiming her place in the world. As she stepped into the living room to serve drinks, Clara caught sight of Mr. Jenkins and his guests seated on the couches. They were deep in conversation, laughing loudly at some joke, their voices booming with the confidence of people who had everything. Clara's eyes flicked to the table beside them, where her phone was resting. She had left it there earlier, in the midst of the family's casual mockery. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the balance on her app again. It had grown, a significant increase, more than she had expected. Her small investments were paying off. She had made progress. She had earned this, but no one knew. No one in that room knew what Clara had been doing behind the scenes. No one saw how hard she had worked, how much effort she had put into building something for herself. They only saw the housemaid, the invisible woman who kept their world in order. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stood there, her hand trembling on the tray of drinks. She could feel the weight of their laughter, the weight of their mockery, pressing down on her. But she didn't flinch. She didn't step back. In that moment, Clara realized something. She didn't need their recognition. She didn't need their approval. She had something they would never have: quiet strength. The kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself. The kind of strength that came from knowing who you were, even when the world didn't see it. She stood tall, her gaze steady, as she walked across the room to place the drinks on the coffee table in front of Mr. Jenkins and his guests. As she set the tray down, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. They may not see her now. They may never see her. But Clara knew that one day they would. As she turned to leave the room, she caught a glimpse of the family's newest addition. An expensive vase, sitting proudly in the center of the living room. Clara had cleaned that vase. She had carefully wiped it down every day, making sure it stayed shiny and perfect. But now, as she looked at it, she saw it for what it was. A symbol of everything she had been working for. She wasn't just a housemaid anymore. She wasn't just a woman who cleaned for other people. Clara Davis was building her own future. A future where she wouldn't have to serve anyone but herself. The mockery no longer felt like a burden, felt like fuel. Clara smiled softly to herself as she closed the door behind her, the sounds of laughter still echoing in the distance. They didn't know it yet, but the game had already changed. And this time, Clara would be the one to define her own success. The house had grown silent once more. The laughter and chatter of the guests had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional rustling of the trees outside. Clara stood at the kitchen counter, her hands methodically wiping down the surfaces, but her mind was far away, focused on one thing: the app. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about it since the increase in her balance. It wasn't the largest sum of money, not by any means, but it was significant. It was more than what she had expected, more than what she thought she could ever make in a single year, let alone a few months. The numbers were growing. Slowly, steadily, like a quiet current she was learning to ride. Clara had started her investments with the smallest amounts possible, dipping her toes into the world of financial growth, unsure of where it would take her. She had always lived a life of caution, where every penny counted, every hour of labor was accounted for. And now, for the first time, she felt the thrill of watching her savings grow without having to work her fingers to the bone. But with that excitement came fear. Fear of making the wrong choice, fear of losing everything she had worked for. That fear was something she knew too well. It was the same fear that had kept her in the background for years. The fear that had whispered to her that she was just a housemaid and would always be nothing more than that. Clara closed her eyes, pushing the fear aside for the moment. She had already taken the first step. She had made the investment. She had let go of the fear, even if only for a brief moment. Now it was time to trust in herself and the decisions she had made. The phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Patricia again. Patricia, Clara, I've been checking the market, and now's the time to make your next move. This is the window you've been waiting for. Don't wait. Invest more. Clara's fingers hovered over the phone, uncertainty creeping back into her mind. She had made progress, but was she ready to go further? Was it too risky? For years, Clara had lived her life within limits. Her world was a small one, defined by the walls of the homes she cleaned and the rules of the families she served. She had learned to be content with her place, to take pride in the work she did, even if it was never recognized. She had never been encouraged to think beyond the boundaries of her role. But now, Clara was no longer just a maid. She had made a choice, her choice to begin investing in her future. The small victories, the dividends, the steady growth of her savings, had given her something she had never known before, hope. And that hope was something she was unwilling to give up. Clara looked around the kitchen, the familiar surfaces of the countertops and the gleaming dishes. This was her life, but it was also only part of her life. It wasn't the whole story, and she wasn't going to let it define her any longer. With a deep breath, she unlocked her phone and opened the app. The numbers were there, steady and rising. They weren't extraordinary, but they were enough. Enough to show her that her hard work, her quiet steps toward a different future, were paying off. Clara tapped on the Invest More button. It was a small move, just another piece of the puzzle she was putting together. But it was a significant one. She sent the confirmation and felt a calmness wash over her. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of a big win, but it was steady. It was building. She was building. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. The Jenkins family had left for another trip, this time to a private beach resort in the Bahamas, and Clara was left alone in the house once again. It was always the same. They came, they went, leaving Clara to take care of the spaces they occupied. She was the invisible caretaker, the one who made sure their world stayed perfect, even as they ignored her existence. But something had shifted. She wasn't just a servant in the background anymore. Clara had made the decision to stop waiting, to stop holding back. She had invested in herself, in her future, in her ability to create a life outside of the one she had always known. Her investments were starting to show promise. It wasn't huge amounts of money, but it was steady, and that steadiness was all she needed to keep moving forward. The small dividends added up, the numbers in her bank app growing ever so slightly, but in a way that gave her the reassurance she needed to keep going. Clara found herself checking the app more frequently now. Each time, the balance had grown. Slowly but surely, the total amount increased. She didn't need to check the app constantly, but each time she did, a new sense of pride swelled in her chest. She wasn't just cleaning for other people anymore. She wasn't just scrubbing floors and washing dishes. She was building something of her own. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the quiet transformation she had undergone. For years, Clara had believed she wasn't worthy of more. She had accepted the life that had been handed to her, never questioning it, never thinking she could have more. But now she was taking control. She was taking steps to ensure that her future wasn't bound by the limits she had once accepted. One evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table, her phone resting in front of her. The numbers on the screen blinked back at her, a silent reminder of how far she had come. She ran her fingers over the screen, checking her latest dividends, her latest balance. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was her work, her decision, her future. For the first time in her life, Clara felt a sense of ownership over something. Not just her work, but her life. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just a woman cleaning other people's homes. She was Clara Davis, a woman who had taken the leap into a future of her own making. A future that no one could take away from her. The next day, as the sun filtered through the windows of the empty house, Clara stood by the window looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The world outside was still. The houses were silent, the streets empty. But Clara felt something different. She felt alive. She felt like the future was hers for the taking. And in that moment, she realized something. This was just the beginning. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't finished. The app on her phone was just the first step. There was so much more to do. Clara Davis was no longer a housemaid. She was a woman with a future of her own making. And no one, not even the Jenkins family, could take that away from her. The evening felt different. Clara could feel the weight of it in the air. Something was about to change. As she wiped down the kitchen counters, a sense of anticipation lingered, something she hadn't felt in years. The usual hum of the house was strangely absent, and the silence that filled the empty rooms felt almost charged. The Jenkins family had gone out again, another one of their frequent trips, leaving Clara alone in the pristine home. She knew the routine by heart. It was a steady, predictable rhythm. Dust the shelves, wipe down the counters, make sure the floors were spotless. But tonight, Clara felt an odd stirring inside her, an energy that had nothing to do with her cleaning routine. She'd been getting used to the idea of change, of building a life that wasn't tied to the homes of others. She had been investing slowly but surely in herself. Each decision she made had taken her one step further away from the woman she once thought she was. The phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping Clara from her thoughts. It was Patricia again. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she pulled the phone from her pocket. Patricia, Clara, I've been checking the market, and we've got an opportunity. But you have to move fast. There's an opening to invest in something big, something that could change everything. Are you ready? Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she held the phone, reading the message over and over. The words echoed in her mind. Something big, something that could change everything. Was she ready? Could she take that next step? The last few months had been a whirlwind of small victories, each one building on the last. Her investments were paying off slowly but surely. But this was different. This wasn't just another small step. This was a leap, a chance to take her journey to a whole new level. Clara stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. For years, she had been living in the shadow of other people's lives. She had been the housemaid, the one who was always overlooked, always dismissed. She had spent her days cleaning their messes, serving their needs, and quietly accepting the life that had been handed to her. But now, Clara had something different. She had a future she was building for herself. And in that moment, Clara realized that this was her chance to take control, to step into a life that was truly hers. Her thumb hovered over the phone screen. The message from Patricia was still there, waiting for her reply. Are you ready? Clara closed her eyes for a moment, the sounds of the empty house swirling around her. For years, she had been told who she was. She had been told she was just a maid, that she would never be anything more. But now she knew differently. She had spent too long waiting for someone else to give her permission to succeed. Now it was time for her to give herself permission. She pressed the button to reply. Clara, I'm in. Let's do this. Her heart raced as she hit send. This was it. The moment when everything would change. She didn't know exactly what Patricia had in mind. But for the first time in her life, Clara felt something she hadn't felt before. Power. Real power. The power to make choices that were hers alone. The power to create a future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation. Clara continued with her usual tasks around the house, but her mind was always elsewhere. The market was shifting, and Clara could feel the tension building. She knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when all of her small victories would finally add up to something big. One afternoon, as Clara was sweeping the floors in the hallway, she heard the familiar sound of the Jenkins family's car pulling into the driveway. The family was back from their trip, and the house would once again return to its usual rhythm. But for Clara, everything was different now. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned their homes and made their lives easier. She had become something more. She was becoming a force in her own life. Clara walked to the front door as the Jenkins family entered the house. Mrs. Jenkins, with her usual air of elegance, greeted Clara with a quick nod. "Clara, we're going to need some refreshments for the guests tonight," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice as crisp as ever. "Could you make sure everything is ready? We have a few people coming over later." Clara nodded, the familiar instructions falling on her ears. She could almost hear the words before they were spoken. This was the life she had known for so long. The life where she moved in and out of the background, always doing what was expected of her. But Clara knew that wasn't her life anymore. As she prepared the drinks for the guests, Clara's thoughts turned back to the opportunity Patricia had offered her. She had already taken the leap. Now it was time to see if she could soar. The evening unfolded like so many others, with laughter and conversation filling the air. Clara always had been, but now Clara wasn't bothered by it. She wasn't angry, nor was she resentful. She had learned to accept that people like the Jenkins family would always see her as less than they were. But that no longer mattered. Clara was building something that didn't need their recognition. The night wore on, and Clara found herself in the kitchen again, preparing to clean up. The voices from the living room were still loud, but Clara had learned to tune them out. She was focused now, focused on her next step. Her phone buzzed again. "Patricia, Clara, it's time. Check your portfolio. The opportunity is live. You can't miss it." Clara's hands were steady as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She didn't hesitate this time. She opened the app and saw that Patricia was right. The numbers were changing again, the market moving in her favor. The opportunity was right there, waiting for her to make the move. Clara pressed the button to make her investment. It wasn't the largest sum she had ever put in, but it was the boldest. It was a statement that she wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to play it safe. The small steps she had taken had led her here, and now she was ready to take a leap. As she hit the confirm button, a sense of calm washed over her. She had done it. She had invested, and it was a decision that felt right. It wasn't about the money, it was about the belief she had in herself. The confidence to make her own choices, to take risks and reap the rewards. That night, as the Jenkins family's laughter echoed through the house, Clara stood still for a moment. She listened to their voices, but for the first time, they didn't feel like they had any power over her. She was making her own future now. She was no longer the invisible housemaid. She was Clara Davis, a woman who was building something real, something she had created with her own hands. As she turned off the lights in the kitchen and made her way to the bedroom, Clara's heart was light. She had taken control of her life. And in that quiet moment, she realized that she had just begun to write her own story. The next morning, Clara woke to the usual rhythm of the house, the soft creaking of the wooden floors, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the faint sound of birds chirping just outside the window. The Jenkins family was gone again, off to yet another one of their lavish getaways. It was just Clara, alone in the house, with nothing but the quiet company of her thoughts. She sat at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the phone in her hand. She had invested more money the night before, more than she had ever dared to put in before. The app on her phone had shown her numbers climbing steadily, this time a larger leap than ever. But with that leap came the familiar feeling of doubt. Was it the right decision? Would the market shift and take it all away? For so long, Clara had kept to the shadows. She had played it safe, She had been the one cleaning other people's homes while they lived in luxury. She had been overlooked, dismissed, always doing what was expected of her. But now she was taking control. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything she had dreamed of for years. Everything she had told herself was impossible. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. The message was from Patricia. Patricia, Clara, check the market now. It's moving in your favor. Big, you've got to look. Don't miss this opportunity. You're on the verge of something huge. Clara's pulse quickened. She opened the app and saw it. The numbers were growing, faster than she could have imagined. Her heart pounded as she watched the balance rise. It was happening. She had made the right call. For the first time in her life, Clara felt a sense of control. The feeling of being in charge, of making her own decisions, was something she had never experienced before. She stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the investment button. Should she reinvest? Should she take the next step? The decision wasn't easy, but Clara knew that hesitation could cost her. She had already taken one big leap by putting in the money she had. Now, she was standing on the edge of something even greater, but that doubt still lingered. The same doubt that had kept her from believing she could have more, that she could be more. It had been her constant companion for years, the voice that told her she was just a maid, that she was nothing more than the woman who cleaned up after others. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm in her mind. She couldn't ignore the numbers staring back at her, telling her that she was doing something right. She had taken control of her life, and now it was time to trust herself. She tapped the button, confirming the investment. A sense of relief washed over her. It wasn't just about the money. It was about taking a step forward, about embracing the change she had been resisting for so long. The fear was still there, but Clara had learned that fear didn't have to control her. She had spent far too long letting it dictate her choices. Now she was making her own decisions. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped her out of her thoughts. The Jenkins family was back from their trip. Clara quickly slipped the phone back into her pocket, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't need them to know about her success. She didn't need anyone to validate her choices. This was her journey, her path, and it was moving in the right direction. As she opened the front door to greet Mrs. Jenkins, a familiar sense of invisibility settled over her. The world they lived in was still so far removed from her own. They had no idea what was going on inside her head, the changes she was making, the quiet transformation that had already begun. They saw her as just the housemaid, the one who was always there but never truly seen. But Clara wasn't just the housemaid anymore. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned their house. She was someone who had a plan, someone who was building a future for herself. The numbers on her phone told the story. The small wins were adding up, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt like she was finally in control. Mrs. Jenkins greeted her with a distracted smile, her usual air of superiority never far from her lips. "Clara, we need to talk about the guest list for the next party. Can you make sure everything's ready? You know the drill." Clara nodded, her mind drifting. She had heard the request so many times before. The demands, the expectations. It had always been this way, but it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't just the woman who answered to their every need. She was Clara Davis, a woman who had taken control of her life, and that was something no one could take from her. As the day wore on, Clara found herself in the kitchen again, preparing dinner for the family. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but Clara's mind was elsewhere. She thought about how far she had come, how she had slowly, quietly, built a life for herself that wasn't dependent on anyone else. She had always believed that she was stuck in the background, never able to break free from the role others had assigned her. But now, Clara was taking control. She was building something of her own. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Patricia. "Patricia, Clara, I just checked again. Your portfolio is growing. You're on the brink of something incredible. Don't stop now. This is the moment you've been waiting for." Clara smiled to herself, her fingers tightening around the phone. She had done it. She had made the decision to trust herself to take that first step. And now it was paying off. She had built something for herself, something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or validation. As she set the table for the Jenkins family, Clara glanced around the kitchen. The home was spotless, as always. The family's world was perfectly curated, their lives filled with luxury and ease. But Clara knew something they didn't. She had something they could never take from her, a future she was building with her own hands. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the guests. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. The next few hours would be spent in the background, serving their needs, cleaning up after their messes. But that didn't matter. Not anymore. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a housemaid. She was Clara Davis, and she had a future that was entirely her own. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of anticipation and quiet decision-making. Clara had stepped into a world she had once only observed from the outside, and with each day that passed, she felt more and more like she belonged. The money in her app was growing steadily, confirming what Clara had known all along. She was capable of more than she had ever believed. It wasn't the kind of transformation that made headlines or turned heads. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic moments where everything changed. It was subtle. The growth, the quiet wins, they were hers alone, and she wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. The numbers on her phone were proof of her quiet determination, proof that she had taken control. But then, one afternoon, her phone buzzed again. The message was from a name Clara hadn't seen before. Darren Mitchell, a name that carried a certain weight. Darren Mitchell. Clara, this is Darren Mitchell. I'm a partner at Jameson and Company. We've been following your recent success in the market, and I think we can help you take it to the next level. Would you be open to discussing an opportunity? Clara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize the name. Who were they? How did they know her? She sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed a response. Clara, I'm intrigued. What kind of opportunity are you referring to? The seconds seemed to stretch on forever as she waited for a response. Her mind raced with questions. What was this about? Was this real? Was this some kind of scam? But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Something about the message felt legitimate. Clara had come a long way since she first started investing. Her small steps were starting to build something bigger, something that no one could take from her. She had made enough smart decisions to trust herself now. The phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. Darren Mitchell. We've been tracking your investments and your portfolio growth. You've made some great decisions, Clara. But now, there's an opportunity to go beyond just investing in stocks. We can offer you access to high-level real estate deals that could transform your financial future. If you're interested, we'd like to discuss how you can get involved. Clara's heart raced. Real estate. She hadn't even considered the possibility of branching out into anything like that. It was a far cry from the quiet stock investments she had been making. But this was different. This wasn't just some casual offer. Darren's message wasn't just about more money. It was about stepping into a different world altogether. She set her phone down on the table, staring at the message in disbelief. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. This wasn't the life that the Jenkins family had prepared her for. She had always thought of herself as just the housemaid, the woman who cleaned up after others. And yet, here she was on the cusp of an entirely new world. A world where she didn't have to clean anyone else's mess. For years, Clara had lived in the shadows, believing she was too small, too ordinary to have a life beyond what she had known. She had accepted the life of a maid, of someone who worked for others and never asked for more. But that world was fading now. Each small investment, each quiet decision had led her here, right at the edge of something bigger. Still, Clara hesitated. Was this the right move? Should she take the plunge into real estate? It was a huge step and it came with risks. But wasn't that what she had been doing all along? Taking small risks, stepping out of her comfort zone, trusting that each decision would lead her somewhere better? She picked up her phone and dialed Patricia's number. It rang a few times before Patricia answered. Clara, what's up? I've been waiting to hear from you. Did you get the message? I did, Clara replied, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. I don't know what to make of it. Real estate? Is this really something I should consider? Patricia's response was immediate and filled with conviction. Clara, this is huge. This could be the opportunity you've been waiting for. I've known Darren Mitchell for years, and he's a trusted investor. He sees potential in you. You're not just someone cleaning houses anymore. You've been making smart decisions for yourself. It's time to expand. Clara sat quietly, the weight of Patricia's words sinking in. She had been taking small steps, testing the waters, but real estate was a different world. It was big, it was risky, and Clara had never considered it before. But then she thought about everything she had been through. She had spent so many years in the background, never questioning her role in the world. She had accepted the life others had given her, and she had always kept her head down. But now she had choices. She had built something for herself, and she didn't want to stop now. Okay, Clara said, her voice steady now. I'm in. I want to hear more. The decision was made. Clara had taken the leap before, and now she was ready to take the next step. It was scary. It was unknown, but it was hers to take. The next day, Clara met Darren Mitchell. He was nothing like she expected. He wasn't a flashy businessman with a slick suit and a brash personality. Instead, Darren was calm, composed, and articulate, with a quiet confidence that made Clara feel like she was in the presence of someone who had seen it all. He greeted her with a firm handshake and led her into his office. A sleek, modern space that smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. Clara, it's a pleasure to meet you, Darren said, motioning for her to sit. I've been following your progress for a while now. Your ability to take risks, to think outside the box, those are qualities I admire. That's why I'm here today. I want to offer you a chance to do more than just invest in stocks. Real estate has a lot of potential, especially now. And with the right guidance, you could be on your way to something big. Clara listened intently as Darren explained the details of the real estate deals he was offering. He talked about the market, about the potential for growth, and about the way real estate could provide both short-term and long-term financial security. He painted a picture of a future where Clara could not only secure her own financial freedom, but also make her mark in the world of investments. As Darren spoke, Clara felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just an opportunity for more money. It was an opportunity to change her life completely, to go beyond just being the housemaid, to become someone who owned her future. The meeting lasted for over an hour, with Darren explaining every detail of the real estate deals, the risks involved, and the rewards that could come from them. Clara asked questions, took notes, and listened intently. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control. When the meeting ended, Darren stood up and extended his hand once again. Clara, I'm impressed. You have a good head on your shoulders. This is just the beginning, but I have no doubt you're going to do great things. Clara shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Darren. I appreciate this opportunity. As Clara left the office, her mind raced. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself, at least not at first. But now it was clear. She had spent too long in the shadows, too long believing she wasn't worthy of more. She wasn't just a housemaid. She was Clara Davis, and she was ready to take control of her future. And this time, no one could tell her it was impossible. The days that followed Clara's meeting with Darren Mitchell were a blur of activity, but the rhythm of her life had changed. Everything felt charged now, as though she was on the verge of something big, something transformative. She still woke up each morning to the same routine, cleaning, preparing, tidying up, but the house didn't feel quite the same. The Jenkins family remained oblivious, as they always had, caught in their world of privilege and perfection. But Clara's world was different now. The decisions she had made, the small but steady investments, the leap into real estate, it was all adding up. And for the first time, Clara felt the subtle weight of something that wasn't just hope, but certainty. Her phone had been buzzing almost constantly. Each message was an update, a tip, a new opportunity to consider. Every time she opened her app, she saw the growth. It wasn't huge, but it was undeniable. Slowly, her investments were beginning to pay off, just as Patricia had promised. But it wasn't just the financial growth that mattered. It was what that growth represented. For Clara, it symbolized a future she had once thought unattainable. A future where she had control, where she could stand tall in her own right, not just as the woman who cleaned the houses of others. One afternoon, as Clara dusted the high shelves in the living room, she caught sight of herself in the reflection of the polished wood. For a moment, she stopped. She studied her own reflection. She saw a woman who had spent years serving others, never asking for more, never expecting anything to change. But now, as she looked at herself, she saw someone different. Someone who had taken control of her life, step by step, and was now standing on the edge of something big. Clara smiled to herself. There was no fanfare, no applause, just the quiet triumph of someone who had fought hard for her place in the world. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the messages that had come in. A few were updates from Patricia, reminding her to stay focused. Others were tips on how to manage her investments more effectively. Clara had been reading everything she could get her hands on. Books, articles, even forums where successful investors shared their stories. She had become obsessed with learning, hungry for knowledge about how to grow her wealth, how to take her life to the next level. But it wasn't just about money. It was about proving to herself that she could do it, that she could stand on her own 2 feet, independent and strong. It was about showing her children that their mother was capable of creating a future for them, one that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Darren. Darren Mitchell, Clara, I've got another project for you. I think you're ready to take it on. It's a real estate flip, a project that's going to require some work, but I think you'll do great. Let's talk details when you're ready. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A real estate flip. It was exactly the kind of project that could change everything for her. The opportunity was bigger than anything she had ever imagined, and yet, a small part of her hesitated. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. Was she really ready? Could she do it? She set the phone down on the kitchen counter, her fingers curling around the edge as she took a deep breath. The fear was still there, just like it always had been, but it didn't have the same power over her anymore. She had already made the leap, had scrubbed floors in someone else's home. She was someone who had taken control of her future, and she wasn't about to stop now. Clara picked up the phone again, her fingers typing quickly. Clara, I'm in. Let's talk. The decision was made. She was ready. That night, after the Jenkins family had returned and settled in for the evening, Clara found herself sitting at the kitchen table, the house quiet around her. She thought back to all the moments that had led her here. The first time she opened that app, the first small investment, the quiet pride she had felt as the numbers slowly grew. And now, she was standing on the edge of a bigger leap. A leap that would take her into a world where she was no longer the invisible housemaid. She was Clara Davis, a woman who had taken control of her destiny. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the transformation she had undergone. It was about the woman she had become. The woman who no longer accepted limitations, who no longer stayed in the shadows. The woman who had learned to believe in herself. The following week, Clara met with Darren again. This time, they sat in his office, surrounded by sleek furniture and walls lined with bookshelves filled with investment guides and financial records. Clara felt out of place at first. This world felt so different from her own. But as Darren outlined the details of the real estate flip, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't just listening. She was understanding. She was learning. They talked for over an hour about the project, the property they would be flipping, the renovations that needed to be done, and the projected timeline. Darren walked her through every detail, explaining the risks and rewards. It was a big project, but Clara could see how much potential it had. With each passing minute, she felt more and more confident that this was the right move for her. By the time the meeting ended, Clara felt a quiet but powerful certainty. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She wasn't just someone who had invested a little money here and there. She was becoming a player in the game. She was making decisions, taking risks, and learning from each experience. As she left Darren's office that day, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The road had been long, and the journey wasn't over yet, but she was on the right path. She had started from nothing, from a life of silence and invisibility, and now she was building something real, something that was all hers. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Clara worked tirelessly on the real estate project, overseeing the renovations, managing the contractors, and learning the ins and outs of the business. Every day, she felt herself growing more confident, more capable. The fear that had once held her back was still there, but it no longer had the power to stop her. She had become someone who acted, someone who made things happen. As the project neared completion, Clara couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had started as the housemaid, the one who had cleaned up after others, and now she was flipping properties. It was a quiet triumph, no fireworks, no grand announcement, but it was a triumph nonetheless. The day they completed the flip was the day Clara truly understood how far she had come. She stood in front of the newly renovated house, a sense of satisfaction swelling inside her. This was her achievement. She had done it. She had made the decisions, taken the risks, and turned her vision into reality. And when the house sold for more than expected, Clara felt a wave of pride that she had never felt before. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the sense of accomplishment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had done it on her own. As she stood there, looking at the sold sign in front of the house, Clara smiled to herself. She wasn't just the housemaid anymore. She was someone who had changed her life. And for the first time in a long time, Clara knew exactly where she was going. It had been several months since Clara had made her first significant investment, and the changes in her life were undeniable. The quiet triumphs had built upon each other, one after the other, until she found herself standing on the edge of something vast. She wasn't just cleaning houses anymore. She wasn't just following orders or being told where her place was. Clara Davis had forged her own path, one step at a time, and now she was a woman who owned her future. The Jenkins family had remained blissfully unaware of the transformation that had occurred right under their noses. Clara still arrived early every morning, cleaned every corner of the mansion, and served them as they demanded. But she was different now. She wasn't the same woman who had once stood in the kitchen, hoping for a life that was never going to come. She had found her own purpose, her own direction, and that made all the difference. Today, Clara was standing in the middle of a brand new office space, a small but beautifully designed room in the heart of Winston, North Carolina. She had rented this office for herself to run her own investment business. It was small, yes, but it was hers. Every detail, from the fresh paint on the walls to the desk where she now sat, was a reflection of her hard work and determination. The first few days in the office had been a whirlwind. Clara was now running a business that combined real estate investments with wealth-building strategies. She had started with her own savings and her experience in real estate, but she quickly realized that there was a growing demand for financial advice in her community. People wanted to know how she had made her money, how she had turned small investments into real returns. It was a natural progression. Clara had always been a quiet observer, a woman who kept to the background and learned from the world around her. And now, she was using that knowledge to help others. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about giving people the tools to change their own lives, to empower them the way she had empowered herself. Clara sat back in her chair, looking around the office, felt surreal. She had come so far from the woman who had once scrubbed floors for a living, believing she wasn't capable of more. It was hard to imagine that she had once believed her place in the world was nothing more than cleaning up after others. But now, she saw herself as someone with potential, someone who could make a difference. The phone buzzed on the desk, snapping Clara out of her thoughts. It was a message from Patricia. Patricia, Clara, I just saw your latest property sale. Congratulations. You've made it. I'm so proud of you. You're not just doing this for yourself anymore. You're changing the game for others. Clara smiled to herself. The success was gratifying, of course, but it was the recognition of her journey that meant the most to her. She had never done this for the praise. She had never expected to be celebrated. But now, as her business continued to grow, she couldn't deny the sense of accomplishment that came with it. She picked up the phone to reply to Patricia, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. "Clara, thanks Patricia. Couldn't have done it without you. But I'm not stopping here. There's still so much more to do." The reply came almost immediately. "Patricia, I know you, Clara. You've always been hungry for more, and that's why you're going to go so far. You're just getting started. I can't wait to see where this takes you." Clara's heart swelled with pride. It had been a long road to get here, but she had never been more certain of anything in her life. She wasn't just cleaning other people's homes anymore. She wasn't just a maid. She was an entrepreneur. She was a businesswoman, and she had built this life with her own hands. As Clara sat in her office, staring at the walls she had chosen, she thought back to everything that had led her here. The small decisions, the quiet moments of doubt, and the brave steps she had taken to overcome them. It hadn't been easy, and there had been many times when she thought about giving up. There were days when the fear threatened to take over, when the idea of failing felt too heavy to bear. But Clara had never given up. She had kept going one step at a time, and now she was standing on the other side, looking back at all the progress she had made. She stood up from her chair and walked over to the window. The streets of Winston were quiet, but Clara felt a sense of purpose that she had never known before. She had built something real. It was hers, and no one could take it away. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call. Clara glanced at the screen. It was Darren Mitchell. She had known this call was coming. "Clara, how are you?" Darren's voice was warm, filled with the same calm confidence that Clara had grown to admire. "I wanted to reach out and congratulate you on everything you've accomplished. You've done something incredible, and I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Darren," Clara replied, her voice steady. "It's been a long road, but I'm finally where I want to be. I'm not done yet, though. There's so much more to do." Darren chuckled on the other end of the line. "That's exactly why I'm calling. I think you're ready for the next step. I've got a new project coming up, and I think you'd be the perfect fit. It's bigger than anything we've done before, and I'd love for you to be a part of it." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Another opportunity, another challenge. But this time she didn't hesitate. She wasn't the same woman who had questioned herself before. She wasn't afraid of stepping into the unknown anymore. "I'm in," Clara said, her voice firm with conviction. "Let's do it." Darren's voice was filled with approval. "I knew you'd say that. I'll send over the details and we can get started. You're gonna do great things, Clara. I have no doubt about it." As the call ended, Clara sat down again, her mind racing with possibilities. She wasn't just building a business. She was changing the narrative of her life. The quiet housemaid was gone. In her place stood a woman who had created her own path, one step at a time. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the success. It was about the transformation, the quiet shift that had taken place within Clara. She wasn't just playing a part anymore. She wasn't just waiting for someone to notice her. She was creating something real. As the sun set outside the window, Clara smiled to herself. This was just the beginning. The world was hers for the taking, and she wasn't going to stop now.